Ready, Tim? Good evening. Welcome to the March 4th, 2024 meeting of City Council. Tonight's invocation and pledge will be led by Mr. Jeff Schilling. Please stand.
Please rise. We will soon be celebrating the most Irish of days, St. Patrick's Day. It is a day that everyone who celebrates feels they have a wee bit of Irish in them. As a descendant of Irish immigrants, let me remind you so you'll never forget that the Irish arrived on American shores unwelcome and undocumented. The Irish landed in Boston and New York and Philadelphia and Charleston and New Orleans and almost every other port of call in waves that at the time were unimaginable. The Irish were accused of bringing disease and low morals and for some allegiance to a pope instead of to the political parties. It was feared that the Irish were going to pollute and poison the American stock. The Irish spoke a different language. The Irish arrived with the shirts on their backs and at times as indentured servants, slaves to those who paid their way. They arrived with the belief that America would bring a new beginning, a fresh start in life and opportunity. The Irish moved to the city slums. They looked for work, they educated their children, they learned a new language. They migrated to every corner of America, establishing homes and communities in the hopes of finding the American dream. The Irish became farmers and merchants, business owners, educators, scientists, industrialists, legislators, judges, presidents, and even members of Troy City Council. The Irish proved that the seats at the table we call America are never full, that there is always room for those who come to America believing that America provides the best opportunities and the brightest future. Let us pray that America never closes out our borders to those who are willing to risk it all for the chance to live in the best country on earth. Let me leave you with this Irish blessing. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sunshine warm your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. May God hold you in the palm of his hands. Amen. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we start, I'd kind of like to ask for just a brief moment of silence for our tragedy that we've had this week with Ellie Carter, and if you please keep her family and relatives and friends in the city in your thoughts and prayers. Thank you. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Twist, Mr. Schilling,
present.
Mrs. Westfall,
Here.
Mr. Sievert,
Present.
Mr. Pierce,
Present.
Mrs. Snee,
Here.
Mr. Whidden,
Here.
Mrs. Marshall,
Here.
Mr. Phillips.
Move to excuse Mr. Twist.
Second that.
Motion to move excuse Mr. Twist by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Excused.
Move to excuse Mr. Phillips.
Second.
Motion to move excuse Mr. Phillips by Mr. Sievert and seconded by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips is excused.
Mrs. Knight, would you please read the summary of the February 20th, 2024 minutes of council?
Minutes of Council, February 20, 2024. Committee reports. Community Partnerships Committee recommended that legislation be prepared amending Chapter 135 of the ordinances regarding the Human Relations Commission. Finance Committee supported the recommendation of the Loan Review Committee regarding amending the CDBG ED loan made to Speakeasy Ramen LLC. Recreation and Parks Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing bidding for contract for lighting at the North Market Street Girls Softball Field. Committee recommended legislation be prepared to proceed with the park maintenance building project. Streets and Sidewalks Committee recommended that legislation be prepared authorizing bidding for the 2024 paving program. The Personnel Committee reported regarding appointments requested by the mayor and approved the appointment to the Revolving Loan Committee of Josh Lephart, to the Community Improvement Corporation of Heath Murray, and to the Board of Zoning Appeals of Gary Stanley. Those were all approved by unanimous vote. Resolution number R8, 2024, amending the loan from CDBG Economic Development Revolving Loan to Speakeasy Raymond LLC, was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R9, 2024, authorizing Park Board to advertise for bids, enter into a contract for the lighting at the girls' softball field on North Market Street, first reading and adopted. Resolution number R10, 2024, submit proposals for the park maintenance building, was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R11, 2024, bid for the paving program for 2024, was given first reading and adopted. A resolution in memoriam to former Council President and Councilmember William Lohr was approved. Ordinance number 05, 2024, amending Chapter 135 of the ordinances regarding Human Relations Commission, first reading and adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned at 7:32 p.m.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion to approve the minutes by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mrs. Westphal.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
We have 4 committee reports tonight. We will start with Community Partnerships Committee. Mrs. Marshall.
All right, this committee met February 26th regarding accepting .0512 acres of abandoned Miami and Erie Canal land located at the southeast corner of Mulberry and Ray Streets from ODNR. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to execute an agreement to transfer canal lands and execute, file, and record all deeds associated with the abandoned canal land for the .0512 acres located at the southeast corner of Mulberry and Ray Streets. Respectfully submitted by Mr. Sievert, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Any questions or comments on that? Thank you very much. Moving on to Law and Ordinance. Mr. Whidden.
Thank you, Mr. President. This committee met February 26th to consider amending Troy's codified ordinances to reflect the Ohio Revised Code regarding the use of micro-mobility devices on public ways and other changes related to bike lanes and shared use paths. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to amend Chapter 375 to reflect current changes to the Ohio Revised Code regarding micro-mobility devices, bike lanes, and shared use paths. Respectfully submitted by Mrs. Marshall, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Any questions on that report? Mr. Whidden, you have another one.
Thank you, Mr. President. This committee also met on February 26th to consider a 90-day extension to the current 270-day moratorium on accepting applications for specific use cases in the downtown riverfront overlay DRO district. A listing of those uses is attached in this report. The extension will allow staff time to finalize and review and submit a recommendation to the Planning Commission for recommendation to Council. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to extend the current moratorium on the acceptance of applications for specific uses within the DRO boundary by an additional 90 days. This is respectfully submitted by Mrs. Marshall, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Any questions? All right. That brings us to the last report, which is the Committee of the Whole workshop we had. And council members Marshall, Phillips, Pierce, Schilling, Sievert, Snee, Twist, and Whidden, and the President of Council participated in a February 26, 2024 workshop. Also attending were the Director of Law, Director of Public Service and Safety, and the Clerk of Council. The Director of Law provided general information related to ethics, regulations, public records, open meetings, and conflicts of interest. Council members and the President of Council reviewed the Troy City Council rules for procedures and made some changes to said rules. Once the changes have been incorporated and reviewed, it is recommended that the updated Troy City Council rules for procedure be adopted. The subject of the time of council meetings and committee meetings and cancellation of meetings were discussed. It was the consensus that no changes be made at this time to the ordinance provisions of current practice regarding these items. There was a discussion regarding the compensation of elected officials. This subject will again be reviewed at a later date. Excuse me. Information regarding the organizational chart, council role, and the EOP and related subjects have been distributed prior to the workshop. This is respectfully submitted by Christy Marshall, Bobby Phillips, Samuel Pierce, Jeffrey Schilling, Todd Sievert, Lynn Snee, William Twist, Susan Westfall, and Jeffrey Whidden. Any questions or additions to that? All right. Moving on, we have no resolutions tonight. We'll take us to ordinances. Mrs. Knight, would you please read ordinance 06-2024?
Ordinance number 06-2024, ordinance repealing Chapter 375, Bikeways, of the codified ordinances of the City of Troy, Ohio, and enacting new Chapter 375, Bike Lanes and Shared Use Paths of the codified ordinances of the City of Troy, Ohio. This will bring Troy's ordinance in compliance with provisions of the Ohio Revised Code regarding the bike lanes and shared use paths. First reading.
Mr. Roseau?
We'll do this, then we'll go back. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, should we allow, see if anyone has?
We're going to get to that. I blew that. Yeah.
Motion to suspend the rules then?
Second.
Motion made to suspend the rules by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll on that?
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Okay.
To adopt.
I'll make a motion to adopt.
Motion adopted by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, could you call the roll on that?
Could I make
Point of order.
Yes.
Is it all right if we hear public comment before we vote?
I'd just make sure that
There
there weren't any comments on that ordinance
Okay.
before we...
Okay. I screwed up. I missed and skipped over the public comments. Anybody have comments on that, the committee reports, or anything on our agenda tonight? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going back there. So we need to roll on approval, correct?
Yes. Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, could you please read ordinance 07-2024?
Ordinance number 07-2024. Ordinance imposing moratorium for a period of 90 days on the acceptance of applications for specific uses within the boundary of the Downtown Riverfront Overlay, DRO, District of the City of Troy, Ohio. This additional 90 days will attach to the current moratorium, so this new moratorium will commence on May 4th, 2024. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Motion to suspend the readings is by Mr. Schilling, seconded by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes. Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt the resolution is by Mrs. Snee, seconded by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, could you please read our last ordinance, 08-2024?
Ordinance number 08-2024. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into an agreement to transfer canal lands with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. This is regarding .0512 acres of abandoned Miami and Erie Canal lands located at the southeast corner of Mulberry Street and Race Street intersection. First reading.
Motion to suspend the rules?
Second.
Motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Sievert. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Snead,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mrs. Snead. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Snead,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, is there any communications or announcements?
Only the reminder of filing financial disclosure statements.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, I just wanted to, it's been hard for the community over the weekend to realize that we did not have the outcome we had hoped for with Ellie Carter, and very difficult for our police and fire department staff who have been searching for many weeks. I think it makes it even harder that it's a child, but if you would keep our first responders in your prayers. I've met the family. Very difficult for them to have it come to an end like this. Just a tough time for everybody, but big thank you to those that have helped search for her for so long. Thank you.
Director of Public Service and Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
City Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing at this time.
Director of Law.
I detect a theme, so I have nothing to offer.
I do have a question. Dye Mill Road, when is it opening? Sorry? When is Dye Mill Road opening?
March 18th.
Oh, thank you.
Any other council members have comments or questions? I won't skip you this time. Anybody in the audience or staff would like to speak? Please come forward. State name and address, and begin.
Okay. Good evening. Ben Southerly, Troy Historic Preservation Alliance, 110.5 West Main Street. Would just like to give the council an update on the status of the IOOF Old Miami County Courthouse repairs. Scaffolding was erected last week on the front of the IOOF building, and you'll continue to see that scaffolding continue to encircle the building around back in short order. This past Wednesday, the Troy Planning Commission approved by a 4-0 vote a black roof for the both parts of the building, and we signaled to the city administration, well, confirmed for the city administration late last week that it is our intent to repair both buildings. Masonry work is scheduled to start tomorrow morning, weather permitting, and we remain confident that the April 30th deadline will be met. From a fundraising standpoint, our goal is $750,000. We are currently at more than $703,000 in commitments, or 94% of our goal, and more than 90% of those pledges are already in our bank account or have been spent. We have had 177 unique pledges and donations so far. We just had a tremendous response from the Troy and Miami County community. We're so grateful for that. We currently have a Close the Gap campaign running to help us finish our fundraising. We will be repairing the parapet with 536 bricks, and we are selling each brick for $100 each. We're also having a little friendly competition. The total amount raised by residents within the city of Troy and the total amount raised by residents who live outside the city of Troy. And right now, the score is Troy 27, and outside Troy is 21. So this is for donations made on or after February 28th, the day that the Close the Gap campaign began. And those wishing to donate can go to our website at www.thpatroy.org. I would like to share a testimonial from a couple of folks who are donating to our campaign, because I think their perspective sums up why a lot of their fellow contributors are giving toward the project. As a military family, we may not physically live in Troy, but our heart surely does. Having been stationed in Washington, D.C., Texas, Illinois, Utah, and now California, we've seen countless cities, towns, and villages. We could have chosen anywhere in the country to dedicate our time, passion, and investment. We very intentionally chose Troy. The combination of opportunity and affordability in Troy is rare. And when you couple it with passionate, hardworking locals and an immaculately preserved historic downtown, you get something that absolutely doesn't exist anywhere else. It gives Troy an irresistible soul and energy that's on full display in the buildings downtown. They tell a story of a community that values its past, knows where it comes from, takes care of itself, has self-respect, and respect for others. When you combine the soul, the energy, the opportunity, and the people in Troy, you get an unparalleled community with truly unlimited potential. Preserving its soul preserves its future. That's why we made the decision to contribute to the preservation effort. If we live locally, you'd have to hold us back from jumping in and putting in a little sweat equity ourselves. Hope to see you soon. Bob and Claire Waduli. And the Wadulis own the building on the public square where the Agave and Rye restaurant is located. At the end of the day, getting the street open as soon as possible and not having a huge gap in our historic streetscape is a win-win for our community. And I want to reiterate that we have not put all this effort forth just to stabilize the building and then to watch it languish. We are committed to its success. I wanted to take a moment to pause and ask for any feedback. Council members, are these updates helpful for you to have?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. We're just overjoyed that this project has been a catalyst for bringing the community together for something positive. And we would continue to ask that the city administration be supportive of that. We want to keep the lines of communication open. Are there any questions that I can answer?
Mr. Sutherland, can the structural work that needs done in the building run concurrently with the outside work, the parapet and the roof, or does that need to be finished first before you can go to the inside?
So the bulk of the work that's needed to address the stabilization concerns will be largely external in nature. So you're talking primarily roof work, some work to the walls. I can tell you that there will be some current repairs happening both on the IOF building and the courthouse building at the same time. But I mean, there will be some repairs that are happening inside, like they're going to tie in the walls in a couple of areas on the IOF building. So there will be some interior work that's happening. But as far as I know, to be honest, I haven't gotten into that level of detail with Level MB. I anticipate there will be some external and internal work happening at the same time.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just have a quick comment. Not city related, but I wanted to extend a thank you to you for your invitation to the Troy Rotary. I don't know, there was, last week, 20 so people to walk through. So I haven't seen you since. I saw you then, but I appreciate the invite on behalf of Troy Rotary.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, and just for clarification, we are reaching a period of time where the window of opportunity to take people through the building is kind of coming to a close now, because it's going to be a very, very active setting for the next several weeks. But yes, we were delighted to have had the opportunity to take the Rotary through, as well as several other groups. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, we're adjourned.